In December 1804, unknown to Nelson, the French Admiral Pierre de Villeneuve, the man who had eluded him at the Nile, was given orders to break out of Toulon with his fleet and commence a ruse to draw the British Navy away from the English Channel. Napoleon's plan was complicated and demonstrated his lack of understanding of naval operations. What worked on paper would not necessarily work at sea, where the elements ruled no matter what you decided to crown yourself. The idea was to unite the French and Spanish fleets in the Caribbean, drawing the British away in pursuit before making a return dash towards the Channel, arriving en masse to clear the way for an invasion. Nelson knew of an impending French move, but not the details. On the 18th of January 1805, Villeneuve and his fleet evaded the blockade at Toulon and put to sea. The news reached Nelson on the 19th. However, he had no information other than from the weather as to what their destination might be. What intelligence Nelson did have, combined by the recent gales and the wind direction, favoured a French attack on Naples or Sicily. He was mistaken. However, the poor weather conditions had affected the French fleet insomuch as they limped back into Toulon harbour for repairs. Napoleon was not impressed, and Nelson wrote, "Bonaparte himself cannot be more disappointed and grieved at the return of the French fleet crippled into Toulon than I am." Nelson was seeking a decisive battle and welcomed the opportunity to meet the French fleet head-on. In March 1805, Admiral Villeneuve was again ordered to depart from Toulon and to head for the Caribbean. This time he achieved his orders with greater success, passing through the Straits of Gibraltar and out into the Atlantic. Nelson received news of the second French breakout and once again used all of the resources available to him to try to track them down and bring them to battle. Having heard little of the whereabouts of the French fleet, except for intelligence from Admiral Campbell indicating that the French were heading west, Nelson correctly surmised that they must have left the Mediterranean and indeed be heading to the West Indies. His logic was perfectly sound. He knew that they weren't in the Mediterranean, and he knew that Admiral Cornwallis's fleet was protecting the Channel. Combined with Admiral Campbell's information and the fact that the most vulnerable British interests were in the West Indies, he felt that to take his fleet west was the correct decision. On the 11th of May 1805, Nelson and 10 ships of the line began the journey west, acting without Admiralty orders and on his own initiative he made for the Caribbean. French Admiral Villeneuve arrived off Martinique on the 13th and met up with the Spanish fleet. He now waited to be joined by other French ships before heading towards the Channel in force. Now his orders were to head for Ferrol to join up with other ships before heading towards the Channel. After embarking soldiers in Martinique and Guadeloupe, he began his return journey on the 5th of June. Nelson, meanwhile, had arrived at Barbados on the 4th of June. Hearing that Villeneuve was indeed in the West Indies, he once again prepared his fleet for battle. After wasting time searching for the French based on poor information, Nelson finally had conclusive intelligence that the French had begun their journey east. Believing that the enemy fleet was heading back to the Mediterranean, in early July Nelson steered a course south of the Azores. He wrote, "I do not yet despair of getting up with them before they arrive at Cadiz or Toulon, to which ports I think they are bound." Villeneuve, whose fleet was much slower than Nelson's, steered north of the Azores at approximately the same time. By the 19th of July, Nelson was at Gibraltar, having no idea where Villeneuve had gone. The long chase was over, without the decisive action that Nelson so desperately wanted. On the misty morning of the 22nd of July off Cape Finisterre, Admiral Villeneuve's fleet met with the appropriately positioned ships of Admiral Sir Robert Calder. The Admiralty, having received dispatches from Nelson in the West Indies, took precautions in case the enemy fleet were indeed heading for the Channel, and, on the directions of Lord Barham, had placed Admiral Calder in a position most likely to intercept them. Their lordships' tactics were correct, and on that misty day the two fleets engaged in what was to become a controversial action, and one that would tarnish the reputation of Admiral Calder. Outnumbered and in heavy fog, Calder took on the enemy. But the result was not the decisive action that the nation craved. There was no annihilation, no absolute victory. As evening fell, Calder gave the order to cease fire. The visibility was still poor, and his ships were battered, but he had captured 2 Spanish ships for the loss of no British vessels, and prevented the combined fleet from continuing towards the Channel. He had effectively prevented the invasion. Yet, because of this action, and his decision to break off and not to renew, he was to face a court-martial. Calder stated that because of the weather and the state of his ships, it was not possible to renew the attack. Perhaps Calder's real crime was that he wasn't Nelson. On the 22nd of August, Villeneuve, with his battered fleet, finally limped into the Spanish port of Cadiz to refit, restock, and await the next set of orders from Napoleon. After the failure of his ambitious naval plans to support an invasion of England, Bonaparte decided to abandon the attempt and to take La Grande Armée east.